Hey everybody, I'm MS Farzan, and welcome back to this series on how to build a multiplayer card game using Phaser 3, Express, and Socket.io. In this video, we're going to continue to build out the user interface for our game. Behind the scenes, I've just done a couple of small things. I've deleted the Phaser logo from the assets directory and pasted a bunch of images or sprites that we're going to use that you can find on the GitHub for this project, which is included in the description of this video. You can use your own cards if you like, or just rectangles or whatever you like. And they're all here in the assets folder, as we see. And so the first thing that I'm going to do, and as you'll notice with this series, because of the nature of the multiplayer component of this game, we're going to have to do a lot of front loading before we actually see anything happen on screen. If you're frustrated with that, or you need to see things in a bit more progressive manner that requires us to delete things and then refactor them or edit them later, you might want to try the original version of this series or an earlier set of this series, or you can even skip to the end of the series and just see the game working to just trust that it's going to work. But it might feel like we have to front load a bunch of stuff before we actually get the game working, which is different than like a platformer where you just like see the person jumping on screen like pretty much immediately. Here, because we have to work on both sides of the game, both the front end and the back end kind of simultaneously, it's going to take us a few videos before we get anything really working. So with that in mind, let's go into our game scene and let's add a few things here. We're going to do this in pretty much alphabetical order. We're going to import a card handler from, I'm totally doing this backwards, from helpers / card handler. We're going to import a deck handler from the same directory. We're going to import an interactive handler from the same directory. And we're going to import also a socket handler from the same directory. Make sure I have the correct number of full stops there. Okay, and just so we, close the loop, we will create files for those. Card handler.js, deck handler.js, game handler.js, interactive handler.js, and socket handler.js. Okay, cool. So, and then in each one of these, we're just going to do some basic declarations here and just say export default class card handler and a constructor. What did I do here? Oops, I don't need these. Sorry. Okay. Export default class deck handler constructor. You'll thank me later. Such is the life of as a programmer. Just got to scaffold a bunch of stuff. Default class, what are we doing? Game handler. And we have a constructor here. Export default class interactive handler. So you can probably tell by the nomenclature. Oops, I did this wrong. That's funny. This is the socket handler, which means we've got nothing in the card handler. Okay. What you probably have surmised by the nomenclature is that we're basically separating each of these ideas. That I need something to handle the card deck. I need something to handle the game logic. I need something to handle interactivity, and that's what we're building here in terms of scaffolding. We just save everything and make sure the game is running. Where's my localhost? Yeah, no errors are thrown, so I just know that everything's running just fine. Okay, and then we'll also in our game scene, just so we kind of get this scene out of the way, basically we're just going to preload the assets here, and then we don't have to deal with our game scene ever again. Everything else is going to be done with the different handlers. So I'm just going to say this.load.image is the phaser nomenclature for loading an image. And I'm going to give it a name, cyan card back. And the location will be source/assets/cyan card back.png. We've got 6 of these, so let's just do this 6 times. 4, 5, 6. And then we'll change this one to magenta card back and cyan boolean. We're using, if you're following along with the provided assets in the GitHub repository, we're using cards from one of my games called Entromancy Hacker Battles. So there's some hacker terminology or programming terminology on them. It's very meta, actually. Programming a game about programming. Magenta boolean, cyan ping, and magenta ping. Good. And let's make sure that we change the locations as well. Magenta card back.png, cyan underscore boolean 3x, and then magenta underscore boolean 3x, cyan underscore ping 3x, and magenta underscore ping 3x. Okay, now that's pretty much done. All we need to do is now create these new basically like instances of these handlers. So we'll just say this dot card handler equals new card handler, and we're going to we don't need to pass in this for the card handler, at least not now. This dot deck handler equals new deck handler, and we're going to pass in this scene that we're working with. This dot game handler, which we never referenced up above, so I'll have to do that, equals new game handler, pass in this. This dot socket handler is a new, whoops, a new socket handler, pass in this. And then the UI handler is here. And we need to build the UI before we do this dot interactive handler. And that's just going to be the nature of the beast with how we build our interactivity handler. I don't know why I couldn't have named it interactivity handler instead of interactive handler, but you can yell at the screen as I am. Import game handler from helpers game handler. Okay, now we are pretty much totally done with this game scene. We can just forget about it for a while. Actually, like for the entirety of this tutorial. You're done with the game scene. And now that we've done that, let's like reward ourselves by doing something that actually matters in terms of rendering things on the screen. And what we'll do here is we'll go to our UI handler, and we'll build our UI for ourselves. Now, this is going to require yet another handler, and I think this might seem tedious to you right now, and I mean it is tedious, but you will hopefully be happier later when we look at everything and we say, oh wow, all of these things are separated, and I can add to or subtract from or expand or extend as necessary. That's the whole ethos behind this, is that I'm attempting to give you tools that you can extend as necessary. So I'm going to call this zone handler.js. And in the zone handler, we're going to start writing our code for building a drop zone for our cards to go into. We'll say export default class zone handler, and the constructor will take a scene, and we'll write a custom function. We'll say this.render zone equals, we'll pass in x and y coordinates, and we'll say let drop zone equals scene.add.zone. That's a phaser zone, and we'll use x and y as the coordinates. And right now I'm just going to make this 850 by 230 pixels, and I'm going to set it as a rectangle drop zone that has the same dimensions or positions. No, dimensions, that's right. And then I'm going to say drop zone dot set data, and cards, the key cards will be set to 0. We'll want to know how many cards are in the drop zone at any given time, so that we can render cards accordingly when they're dropped and they don't all just go one on top of one another. And then I want to return the drop zone to whatever is calling it. And then when you render a zone in in Phaser, you also have to render the outline for it, otherwise you won't be able to see it. So I'm going to say this.render outline. I'll take in the drop zone, a drop zone. Say let drop zone outline equal scene.add.graphics, and the drop zone outline dot line style. We'll give it a like a width of 4 and a color of 0xFF69B4. It's like a hot pink to fit with the cyberpunk theme. And then drop zone outline dot stroke rect. And this is basically we're drawing the rectangle around the actual drop zone. Drop zone dot x minus drop zone dot input dot hit area dot width over 2. This might seem a little bit arcane, but that's just the way you got to do it with Phaser. You can check out the drop zone and outline documentation in Phaser if you'd like to know more. And then drop zone dot y minus drop zone dot input dot hit area dot height over 2. Drop zone dot input dot hit area dot width, and drop zone dot input dot hit area dot height. Okay, great. Can we see it on screen yet? No, because we haven't done that work yet. But we will. Let's save this, go into our UI handler, and what do we do there? Checking my cheat sheet. Okay, great. We're going to add above our build game text, we're going to add a custom function. We'll say this.build zones equals scene.dropZone. It makes me think that actually maybe we didn't need to pass in the scene as a parameter, but anyway. Scene.dropZone equals this.zoneHandler, which we haven't referenced, render zone, or haven't declared, I should say, 470, 500. And then this.zoneHandler.render outline scene.dropZone. Okay, so top of the file, we need to import zoneHandler from zoneHandler. And then you have to say this.zoneHandler equals new zoneHandler and pass in the scene. Oh, we did need it. What was I saying? We did need to pass in the scene, of course. So basically what we've done here, we've imported the zoneHandler class and we've created a new instance of it. And we're saying that build zones is going to be a function that actually uses this drop zone, this zone handler to build a drop zone in our scene and then render the outline for it. And then within this.build UI, we're going to say this.build zones. But let's do it chronologically or sequentially. This.build zones. So what's cool about this is that although we're actually building the UI in the game scene, we never really have to refer to our game scene. We just say like, okay, just build the UI and just handle it yourself. Like I don't really want to deal with it anymore. But in our UI handler, we could do all kinds of stuff here, and I think if I'm right, I think this is called, at least if you sift through the Microsoft documentation for .NET stuff, they call it dependency injection, where it's like, okay, our game scene is dependent on all this UI building, but we inject it at runtime, meaning that like I can do all this work in a separate file and not in my game.js file. Game.js just needs to know that it needs to build the UI, and then I can add as necessary to this build UI function and have a good time. And now I say that, okay, now I've added this build zones function to it. I save it, and I go to my screen, and look at that. We just built a crucial piece of our UI. This is our drop zone next to the deal cards button or text, which is that's really cool. You should pat yourself on the back, and that's awesome. We're not done with this video yet, though. We're going to build the rest of our UI, and we're going to build our player areas. This.build player areas. We're going to say we're going to create outlines for the hand areas, like for the player hand and the opponent hand, or player A and player B, whatever you want to call it. We'll say scene.player hand area equals scene.add.rectangle, and we're gonna make it be at the 470 x coordinate, 860 y coordinate, and we want it to be 850 by 230 in terms of its size. Scene.player hand area set stroke style. What do we want it to look like? Well, let's use that same coloration here. 40xFF69B4. Use whatever color you like. Scene.player deck area. Well, where do we want the decks to show up? We'll do scene.add.rectangle. 1000x coordinate, 860y coordinate, 155 by 215, a bit smaller. And then scene dot player deck area, oops, dot set stroke style. Make this a little bit thinner for who knows what reason. 30x00FFFF. I think that's like a cyan or like a cyberpunk blue. Okay, we'll just copy this, make it an opponent area or an enemy area. Scene dot opponent hand area. And opponent deck area. And let's make sure we have the right coordinates for this. We want this to be at 470, 135, and 1035. Okay, save all that. And want to make sure that we also instruct this build UI to this build player areas. Save that. And Webpack has reloaded our scene, and now we've got this really cool looking, well, in my mind, very cool cyberpunk looking play area where we have two decks, player A and player B, or player and opponent. And then we have two player areas, which is where the cards are going to go when they're dealt. And then we also have a central area, which is our drop zone. And that pretty much comprises our UI. You could make this much more complex, of course, if you so choose. The way I've written this, I say build zones. So like if you needed multiple zones, more than 2 zones, you could add a third or a fourth zone for more players. If you need more player areas, you could do that in terms of your drop zones or your player areas. If you need more text, you could do that here. I mean, the sky's really the limit. You should feel free to customize this as you see fit. The only thing that I recommend is to wait until after you've completed the whole video series, as you'll be much happier there now that once you have all the tools in your toolkit to build your game. Or, well, maybe not all of them, but most of them for our purposes here. So we'll continue in the next video, and I hope this video has been helpful for you. If it has, please be sure to like it and subscribe to my channel for more. Please also follow me on Twitter, and you can. I'd love for you to check out my books and games at nightpathpub.com, and we'll see you soon.